It started like any other weeks, sunlight creeping over the quiet cul-de-sac, birds chirping in the neighbor's tree, and the sound of a distant lawnmower slicing through morning stillness. My name is Marcus Castellano, and I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. As a veteran's son and a contractor, I wasn't new to confrontation or stress, but nothing prepared me for what was about to unfold with HOA President Karen Whitmore-Stanton. The trouble began with a car. More specifically, Karen's 2019 white Lexus RX 350 that she seemed to believe was exempt from the concept of a driveway or property lines or basic decency. She started parking it partially in front of my driveway, claiming there wasn't enough guest parking available. I let it go the first time and the second, but by the third week, when I had to back into a trash can to avoid grazing her bumper, I left a polite note on her windshield. It was neatly folded, respectfully worded, and signed with my name. That's when things went nuclear. The next morning, I got a violation notice from the HOA claiming I left unapproved personal signage on another resident's vehicle. A fine of $125 was enclosed. My jaw dropped. I walked the paper right to Karen's porch and rang the bell. She opened it with a smirk, wearing her trademark floral blouse and clutching a sparkling wine glass. At 9:30 a.m., "Marcus," she purred, "you know the rules apply to everyone." I reminded her that blocking a driveway was in fact a violation too. She waved me off like I was a fly on her porch swing. "I'm allowed guest overflow for HOA business, and I'm hosting a meeting tonight." That was the beginning of my slow, calculated unraveling of Karen's kingdom of selective enforcement and unchecked power. Over the next 2 months, her petty campaign escalated. I'd find sticky notes on my truck claiming I was exceeding driveway width by 4 inches. I got fined for non-compliant window blinds, even though mine had been the same color since 2016. When my nephew came to visit for the weekend, Karen knocked on my door personally and told him he couldn't park on the street because he wasn't an approved guest. Her tone was icy. Her smile was fake. Her intent was clear. She wanted me out, but I had other plans. First, I started documenting every incident, every fine, every time her Lexus crept into my property line. I took photos, time-stamped videos, and kept receipts of all the mail she sent. I even installed a discreet dash cam that recorded her movements outside my house. One afternoon, I caught her in the act, sneaking onto my porch and photographing my flower pots. She later fined me for unauthorized planter arrangements. That fine was $75. The next week, I received another one for visible work boots left outside. Those boots, they were mine, set on a mat just beside the door I used daily. The woman was fishing, but what she didn't know was that I had been fishing too. Through an old friend who worked at the county clerk's office, I requested HOA financial filings from the last 5 years. What I found nearly made me drop my coffee. Karen had been approving community repairs to a clubhouse renovation fund that didn't exist. Over $700,000 in budget allocations had been routed to phantom contractors, many of whom had fake or inactive business licenses. I printed every page. I assembled a dossier. Then I took it to several of my neighbors, some who had also been hit with bogus fines or surprise landscaping fees. Together, we formed a quiet alliance. We weren't just mad. We were meticulous. We documented her surveillance behavior, organized town hall meetings, and slowly began to chip away at her empire of intimidation. I even found that Karen's own property had illegal improvements. Her back porch had been extended without a permit, and the landscaping lights she used to show off her roses violated code for years. But she fined me for a crack in my walkway. Then came the final straw. It was a rainy Tuesday when I returned home from a job site to find her Lexus not only parked in front of my driveway, but diagonally across it. I couldn't even pull in. I honked. I waited. I even rang her bell. No response. That night, I decided her car was going to vanish, legally, permanently. Using connections in the city towing department, I filed a complaint with documented evidence and property line measurements. Turns out, Karen wasn't just blocking my driveway. She was partially on public sidewalk space. By dawn, her Lexus was gone, towed, impounded. And to make things even better, her vehicle had expired registration tags she hadn't renewed in 11 months. She was fined $1,200. The moment she realized I had triggered the process, she marched to my yard screaming, but this time, the neighborhood watched from porches, and no one came to her aid. That night, I posted all the HOA financial findings on our community board's private portal. The next morning, half the neighborhood had printed them. A formal complaint was filed with the county. Karen tried to hold an emergency board meeting, but no one showed. Her kingdom was crumbling. Within 3 weeks, she resigned, citing personal health stress. But she wasn't done with me yet. She left behind a motion to remove my front porch light for being too bright. The motion failed 14-1. I later heard she tried to run for board president in another community across town. They rejected her application after a background check and several calls from former neighbors, including me. Now every time I pull into my driveway, I smile. There's no Lexus, no sticky notes, no Karen, just my nephew's skateboard by the porch, my boots outside on the mat, and my freedom. Sometimes the quietest war is won by simply refusing to move and learning exactly what's waiting behind the fine print. After Karen's resignation, the neighborhood breathed like it had just survived a hurricane. Lawns looked greener, kids played in the cul-de-sac again, and for the first time in months, the HOA meetings were held in the community center instead of Karen's deck, where Chardonnay was the only thing flowing more than her rules. I thought it was over. I thought I'd finally get my peace, but Karen wasn't the kind of person who vanished into the shadows quietly. No, she had one last show to put on, and she was just waiting for the right curtain call. About 2 weeks after her resignation, a white envelope showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no postmark, just my name written in tight, pinched cursive. Inside was a printed letter with bold, red font across the top. Notice of intent to sue. At first, I laughed. Thought it was a bluff, but 3 days later I was served. Karen had filed a civil suit claiming harassment, defamation, emotional distress, and unlawful targeting of a community leader. It was 9 pages of wild accusations, ranging from trespassing to computer hacking to emotional weaponization. That last one made me read it twice. I immediately called my friend Nathan, a former Marine turned paralegal, who knew the court system inside and out. He looked over the documents and told me exactly what I suspected. She was trying to use the system to intimidate me into silence again, but I wasn't scared this time. I had everything I needed: video, timestamps, HOA documents, community testimonials. And most of all, I had the truth. I filed a countersuit within a week, claiming abuse of authority, retaliation, and financial misconduct during her time as president. The neighborhood buzzed like a beehive poked with a broomstick. People stopped me at the gas station to say, "We're with you." Anonymous letters of support showed up at my door. And then one evening, Cheryl, an older resident who Karen had once fined for having a pink flamingo lawn ornament, walked up and handed me a thumb drive. "You'll want to see this," she said quietly. I played it later that night. It was Karen, filmed during a community meeting before her resignation, bragging about squeezing out that loudmouth contractor with her fines and rules. Her exact words were, "If he won't leave, I'll fine his shadow if I have to." I showed that footage to Nathan. He smiled like a wolf. "This is gold." The court date arrived like thunder. Karen, now sporting dark sunglasses and a knee brace she hadn't worn before, limped dramatically into the courtroom. Her lawyer was young, eager, and clearly hadn't been told the full story. I watched his confidence evaporate with each piece of evidence we submitted. Video, emails, meeting transcripts, the financial discrepancies, and then Cheryl's footage. Karen's face turned pale. Her lawyer asked for a recess. The judge didn't grant it. In the end, the case was thrown out. My countersuit, however, wasn't. A settlement conference was ordered. Karen was forced to pay a portion of the HOA budget back into the community fund and publicly apologize in the next HOA newsletter. Her message, full of legal jargon and passive regret, read like a cold toast, but it was printed and archived forever. After the courtroom drama, the neighborhood elected a new board, fresh faces, reasonable voices. People who'd lived here for decades without ever trying to turn a cul-de-sac into a dictatorship. I was asked to serve. I politely declined. I just wanted to build again, live again, rest again, and for a few weeks I did. Then came the strange noises. First, it was just the sound of tires popping late at night. Then motion lights would trigger outside, but no one would be there. One morning, I found my garden hose uncoiled and twisted into a pretzel shape. No animal could have done that. At first, I thought it was teenagers, but then I found a smear of lipstick on my mailbox handle. Karen wore a shade of deep rose called Suburban Sunset. I remembered because she had once bragged about how it matched her landscaping tulips. I didn't tell anyone. I just installed new cameras, hidden ones this time, tucked inside motion sensors and birdhouses. I let the trap sit. 3 nights later, the footage captured her, Karen, tiptoeing into my yard at 2:14 a.m., hoodie pulled over her head, trying to unscrew the light bulb in my porch lamp. I called the police. They came, reviewed the footage, and made an arrest. She was booked on trespassing and vandalism. Her mugshot made the local neighborhood Facebook page. The comments were brutal. Thought she moved to Florida. Guess HOA stands for harass our area. Karen was issued a restraining order. She violated it within a week. Caught tailing my truck in a borrowed Toyota Camry she thought I wouldn't recognize. Another arrest. That was the final nail. The court mandated that Karen undergo psychological evaluation. Turns out she'd been dealing with untreated paranoia and control issues since her divorce 5 years earlier. No one ever checked. No one ever intervened. She just funneled her chaos into power until that power ran out. After her second arrest, she was banned from holding any HOA or community leadership position anywhere in the county. And eventually, her house went up for sale. The for sale sign appeared quietly one morning, planted crookedly in the lawn like a white flag of surrender. She moved out 2 weeks later. The day the moving van pulled away, I stood on my porch, holding a mug of black coffee and watching as her Lexus, yes, the same one, was loaded onto a flatbed. It hadn't run in months. Neighbors gathered quietly, respectfully, like it was the end of a strange, tragic movie. I didn't wave. She didn't look. She just got into the passenger seat of a rental SUV and disappeared down the street. And with her, so did the storm. Now, months later, life is finally still. The HOA board works like it should. The newsletter talks about block parties and gardening tips instead of fines and violations. I built a new deck, repainted the shutters, and sometimes at night, I sit out back and listen to the wind without wondering who's watching me from across the lawn. But every now and then, I get a new letter in the mail. No return address, no stamp, just a folded piece of paper inside, blank, clean, silent, like the breath before a scream. I haven't traced them yet, don't need to, because I already know. Some shadows don't need driveways to find you. Marcus had been silent for long enough. After the garage confrontation and the vanishing of Karen's prized Mercedes, word spread fast. The HOA neighborhood, once a place where fake smiles masked real resentment, now buzzed with whispers, suspicion, and the first signs of rebellion. Some saw Marcus as a vigilante hero. Others warned their kids to avoid him, but he didn't care. His focus had shifted from defense to something far more aggressive, exposure. He started attending every HOA meeting, not to participate, but to document. Karen's expressions when she noticed his phone angled slightly upward, recording, were priceless. She often cut meetings short, flustered and irritated, but she couldn't stop him. Public meetings were fair game. And the more he recorded, the more cracks he found in her polished, concerned citizen facade. She used fines as punishment for disagreement. Her favorite trick, selective enforcement. Trash bins a few inches out of line meant $100 fine for some, but not for her loyalists. One day, Marcus knocked on the door of an elderly man named George, whose house sat quietly at the corner of the block. George had lived there for 32 years, long before the HOA even existed. Rumor had it that he once chaired the HOA but stepped down after Karen took over. Over tea, George shared a folder of letters, some dating back years, complaints, concerns, records of unjust fines, even a formal request to audit HOA financials, all denied, all signed off by Karen. This was gold. With George's blessing, Marcus scanned every document and uploaded them to a secure drive. He also began visiting neighbors under the pretense of doing handyman work, light fixtures, mailbox repairs, door frame realignment. Most people welcomed the help. While he worked, he listened, and what he heard confirmed everything. Unfair citations, harassment, threats of lien filings, all traced back to Karen and her inner circle. He met Ella, a single mother of 2, who had received 7 fines in 1 month, all while being home recovering from surgery. A faded security cam image from Marcus' phone showed Karen herself walking onto Ella's porch and inspecting flower pots. That video joined the archive. Then there was Tom and Lydia, a young couple trying to sell their home. Karen blocked their sale, citing neighborhood stability clauses. She even turned away a buyer during an open house. Marcus obtained the name of the buyer, found her on social media, and confirmed the story. Screenshots saved, statement recorded. At this point, Marcus wasn't just building a case. He was compiling a full-blown HOA dossier. And he had a plan. He contacted a lawyer, an old friend of his father's from military circles, who had a particular distaste for HOA corruption. Together, they drafted a legal request under the HOA bylaws for a full financial audit, signed by over 40 homeowners who had joined Marcus' movement. Karen tried to stall. She claimed the request was invalid due to signature formatting, but the lawyer responded swiftly, citing state statutes and threatening legal action. The clock was ticking. Meanwhile, Marcus made one final move. He created a website, purely informational, called HOA Truth Watch. It featured redacted stories from the neighborhood, testimonials, and eventually, a leak of Karen's internal memo from 2 years ago where she approved bonuses for herself and her treasurer, drawn from collected fines. The site went viral. Other HOA communities across the state picked it up. News outlets reached out. Marcus declined interviews, stating, "This isn't about me, it's about fixing what's broken." Karen panicked. Her demeanor changed overnight. The next HOA meeting was live-streamed. Her attempt at transparency, but it backfired. When questioned about spending, she stuttered. When asked about the $70,000 spent on landscaping, she couldn't name the contractor. Marcus could, because he had called that contractor 3 weeks prior, and they denied ever working in the neighborhood. She tried to discredit him, claiming his vendetta was personal. That's when Marcus dropped the bomb. He revealed his full collection of documented violations, photos, videos, emails, even recorded phone calls from residents who were pressured into silence. The final nail, a spreadsheet comparing the fines of Karen's friends versus her so-called problem neighbors. The bias was undeniable. The room went silent. Karen stood up, trembling, and stormed out of the meeting without a word. Within 48 hours, she submitted her resignation for personal reasons. The treasurer followed. A special election was held. Marcus declined the nomination but endorsed George as interim chair. The neighborhood finally had a chance to breathe, but Marcus wasn't done. He contacted a local journalist and handed over everything. Not for fame, but to warn other neighborhoods dealing with power-hungry HOA tyrants. The story aired the following week. Homeowners stand, taking back the block from HOA abuse. Karen's car never returned. But her legacy completely dismantled. Marcus stood on his porch that evening, coffee in hand, watching the street he'd once thought about leaving for good. Children played. Neighbors smiled again, genuinely. A new chapter had begun, not just for Marcus, but for the entire community. And it all started the day he decided that enough was enough. A few weeks had passed since Karen's resignation, but the aftermath was anything but quiet. Though her presence had vanished from HOA meetings and neighborhood patrols, the remnants of her control lingered like a bad smell in summer heat. The community was free, but cautious. Karen had ruled for so long that people forgot what a neighborhood without her looked like. It was Marcus who reminded them step by step what normal could feel like again. But freedom wasn't enough for Marcus. He had learned something about power, how easily it corrupted and how deeply it could entrench itself in a place that wasn't paying attention. And Karen may have stepped down, but she hadn't disappeared. Her house, sitting in the shadow of the sycamore trees across from Marcus' garage, remained untouched. Curtains always closed, motion lights flickering every night. Occasionally, a luxury SUV with out-of-state plates would park in her driveway, stay for an hour, and vanish before dawn. It didn't take long for Marcus to suspect that Karen was planning something. He wasn't wrong. It started with anonymous letters, folded neatly in black envelopes, left in the mailboxes of those who had signed the audit petition. Some accused people of tax fraud, others warned about pending investigations. One letter even claimed Marcus had hacked HOA systems and stolen resident data, though he hadn't touched a single internal file. Then came the calls, spoofed numbers ringing residents at odd hours. Some neighbors were told their homes were in foreclosure. One woman received a call from a fake Child Protective Services rep claiming someone had filed a complaint against her. That was when Marcus knew Karen was playing her in game. He called a meeting, not a formal HOA gathering, but a backyard assembly of every homeowner who'd stood up to Karen. 47 people showed up, folding chairs scattered across George's lawn under string lights and a slowly setting sun. They shared stories, threats, intimidation, lies. It was Karen's final attempt to reclaim control. Through fear, Marcus stepped forward with his plan. He had been working behind the scenes with his lawyer friend, who had uncovered something that could take Karen down for good. Over the last 3 years, Karen had moved over $140,000 of HOA funds into a shell company registered in her sister's name. That money was traced to purchases far outside the neighborhood. Trips, luxury furniture, even political donations. This wasn't just HOA corruption, this was fraud, felony fraud, but before filing anything official, Marcus wanted to ensure she couldn't wiggle out of it. He wanted her caught, completely, undeniably. So, with help from a few technically inclined neighbors, they installed 3 discrete motion-triggered cameras near her driveway, garage, and mailbox. They also used a parked service van, owned by a neighbor who ran a pest control business, as a decoy surveillance hub. And within 5 nights, they struck gold. A figure appeared at 3:11 a.m., hooded, creeping toward Ella's mailbox. She opened it, slipped something in, and walked back quickly, only to realize too late that the decoy van's side mirror had caught her reflection. Karen, same red, bottomed heels, same tattoo on her wrist, same smug smirk she thought the night had hidden. The next day, Marcus compiled everything into a digital folder and sent it directly to the state attorney general's office. Within 72 hours, Karen was served at her home, charges of embezzlement, harassment, and fraud. Her house was raided, devices seized, and neighbors gathered in the street to watch it all unfold in silent awe. But the story didn't end there. The investigation revealed something deeper. Karen had been part of a statewide network of corrupt HOA officials funneling money through fake maintenance contracts. Several neighborhoods across 3 counties were involved. Her arrest triggered a domino effect, more resignations, more audits, more charges. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She had been a cog in a much bigger machine, and Marcus had taken the first swing. After Karen's arrest, the neighborhood began a complete transformation. Streets that had once been sterile and over-policed began to fill with life. Kids rode bikes without fear of getting fined for noise complaints. People painted their fences whatever color they liked. Marcus and George helped set up a community garden on the old HOA lot that Karen once tried to sell for profit. Even Ella, once terrified of Karen's retaliation, led weekend art sessions for kids on her porch. One Saturday morning, a box arrived at Marcus' door. No return label. Inside was an old HOA meeting recorder, a bottle of whiskey, and a handwritten note. "You did what we were all too scared to do. Thank you, a neighbor." He never found out who sent it. Maybe it was Tom, maybe it was someone he never even met. It didn't matter. What mattered was the neighborhood had taken its power back, not just from Karen, but from fear. One evening, Marcus walked along the road Karen had once blocked with her car, now clear and open. He paused at her old house, now foreclosed and covered in ivy, a for sale sign crooked in the yard. He stood there for a while, not in triumph, but in reflection. Karen thought she could break a neighborhood, but all she did was build a fire in the one man who knew how to burn her paper kingdom down. 3 months had passed since Karen's arrest, but even behind bars, her shadow still stretched across the neighborhood like a storm cloud that wouldn't move on. Her trial had made local headlines. HOA Queenpin faces 12 felonies, read one, and footage of her being escorted out of her home in handcuffs still circled the community Facebook groups like wildfire. Yet there was something eerily unsettling about the silence that followed. No retaliation, no bitter letters, no surprise subpoenas. It almost felt too quiet. Marcus knew better. He had just started to feel peace again, mornings spent sipping coffee on his porch, evenings helping George repair the old dock behind the community lake when it started up again. But this time, it wasn't Karen's doing. At least not directly. This was something more personal. It began with a single car, a black SUV parked just inches from Marcus's driveway gate. It was 7:00 a.m. on a Wednesday. He walked out with his lunchbox in one hand and his laptop bag in the other, only to find the vehicle blocking his exit. No driver, engine off, windows dark, no parking pass. He knocked on the door of the nearest house. No one claimed it. He called the non-emergency line. A tow truck arrived 2 hours later, but just as they were about to hook it up, a woman in dark glasses came running out of a nearby home Marcus didn't recognize. "Sorry, my bad, I was just visiting my cousin." She got in and drove off without another word. Marcus didn't think much of it, until it happened again the next day and the day after that. The car was different every time: a white sedan, a gray pickup, a van with tinted windows, always blocking the driveway. Always empty, always claimed. Just as the tow truck arrived, it was a pattern, and Marcus had seen enough of Karen's manipulative games to know when something wasn't right. He installed cameras, one in the flower bed, one in the mailbox, one above the garage. Within a week, he had his answer: different cars, same driver. She wore wigs, sunglasses, hoodies, but her build was unmistakable. Short, stout, left-handed. Her walk had a slight limp, like she'd once rolled her ankle but never healed properly. It wasn't Karen, but it was someone connected to her. And then Marcus found it: a single frame from the garage camera that showed the woman lifting her sleeve to check her watch, revealing a small tattoo. A date: 7-14-89. Marcus froze. He remembered that date. Karen had used it as the password on her HOA laptop. When he asked why, she once smirked and said, "It's the day my sister saved me from drowning." This woman was Karen's sister. Her name was Pamela Crestwood, and she was here for revenge. Marcus did what he always did: investigated. With help from his lawyer friend, he dug up Pamela's history, a trail of shell companies, court disputes, HOA contracts across the state. In fact, she had been the one who helped Karen set up the original embezzlement funnel. She'd never been charged. She'd never even been questioned. And now, she had moved into a rental house just 3 doors down from Marcus. Her car blocking game was only the start. Over the next few weeks, neighbors started getting anonymous HOA notices, violations for things that weren't in the bylaws. Marcus was fined $800 for improper landscaping, even though his grass had been trimmed the day before. George got a letter threatening to remove the garden beds he built with community volunteers. Ella received a lien notice claiming she owed 3 years of back HOA dues despite proof of full payment. The kicker: all the notices had a new logo, the Crestwood Community Compliance Group. Pamela had formed her own HOA, not legally, not with resident votes, just claimed it. She mailed out pamphlets, hired rent-a-cops, even launched a website where people could report noncompliance anonymously. Marcus tried to confront her, but she refused to come to the door. Her fake board members, likely just friends using pseudonyms, threatened legal action if Marcus continued harassing the president. Enough was enough. Marcus filed an injunction in county court and gathered over 60 neighbor affidavits to declare Pamela's organization fraudulent. But before the court date arrived, she escalated. One evening, Marcus came home to find his car missing from the driveway. At first, he thought it had been towed. He called around, nothing. Then he checked his cameras. At 2:48 a.m., a tow truck unmarked backed into his driveway. A man in a ball cap jumped out, hooked up Marcus's car, and drove off. No paperwork, no lights, no notice. It was a theft, plain and simple. But here's where Pamela made a mistake. She used the same bogus tow truck driver 3 nights later, this time targeting Ella's car, and Ella had just installed a brand new license plate camera, which got a perfect shot of the truck's plate. Marcus contacted his friend in the police department. Turns out, the truck was registered to a shell company. Guess who was listed as a board member? Pamela Crestwood. The cops moved fast this time. With evidence from Marcus, Ella, and several others, they raided Pamela's home, uncovering fake invoices, parking violation notices, and a stolen laptop that once belonged to the actual HOA. They found Marcus's car in a storage lot under a tarp. Alongside 3 others, all taken from residents who had filed complaints against her, Pamela was arrested for impersonating an HOA officer, vehicle theft, mail fraud, and conspiracy. Her bail was denied, citing continued community intimidation and flight risk. And just like that, the Crestwood saga came to an end. This time, there were no silent stares from the window, no smug grins, no final smirks, just cold steel handcuffs and a judge who had already heard enough HOA nonsense to last a lifetime. After the arrest, Marcus led the effort to pass a new neighborhood charter banning any future HOA from forming without 90% resident approval and establishing a rotation of community, elected maintenance leaders. It wasn't about power anymore, it was about trust. He also created a podcast, the HOA Survivor Files, where he and neighbors shared their experiences, invited legal experts, and warned others how to spot HOA abuse before it spreads. One morning, as Marcus walked to his garage without any SUV blocking his way, he looked up at the sunrise and chuckled. "Driveway's mine again," he said, and this time it really was. The weeks following Karen's public shaming should have been quiet, but they weren't. She wasn't going to let go without one last power play. I could sense it in how she walked around the neighborhood, slower now, no clipboard, but with eyes scanning everything like a wounded predator. And even though we'd won the battle in the town meeting, the war wasn't over until Karen Whitmore-Stanton was officially out of power, and until she was legally accountable for everything she'd done. The first strike came quietly. A letter from a new law firm appeared in my mailbox, a cease and desist warning me not to engage in defamation of Ms. Whitmore-Stanton. It was signed by a local firm that just so happened to have strong HOA ties, including her cousin working as a legal assistant. I laughed, scanned it, and sent it straight to my own attorney, who was now preparing a civil suit against the HOA and Karen. The neighbors rallied harder than ever. Tim, the retired firefighter, offered to speak with local media outlets. Heather started gathering statements from over 40 residents, documenting fines, threats, and racial profiling. Every single complaint was notarized and submitted to the state HOA regulation board. We had momentum, evidence, and most importantly, unity. Then, the bombshell. A subpoena arrived for Karen to appear in a county hearing regarding misuse of HOA funds. The HOA treasurer, finally cracking under pressure, had turned over banking records showing massive inconsistencies, weekly withdrawals just under the legal threshold, checks written to vague contractors, and one in particular for over $700,000 labeled landscaping restoration. That no one could verify. The day of the hearing felt like a community event. Dozens of us showed up in support: retirees, young families, veterans, and even teenagers who were tired of being told they couldn't skateboard on their own street. Karen walked in wearing oversized sunglasses and a blazer too big for her, flanked by an expensive lawyer and her nervous husband trailing behind. The board laid out the charges calmly and clearly: misappropriation, unauthorized fines, harassment, voter suppression in HOA board elections. Even the judge, a firm but fair woman, looked unimpressed by Karen's constant interruptions. Her lawyer tried to argue these were clerical errors or misunderstood protocol, but it was all weak. Then it was my turn. I brought the evidence, the photos, the fines, the emails, but what hit hardest was the neighborhood surveillance footage. Karen, caught on tape, keying a resident's car. Karen screaming at a boy who accidentally kicked a soccer ball onto her lawn. Karen blocking my driveway again at 2 a.m., muttering into her phone, "He's going to pay for this." The courtroom was silent. When the final verdict came down, the room practically exhaled at once. Karen was removed as HOA president effective immediately. She was fined $45,000 for harassment-related damages and ordered to pay back the HOA missing funds or face criminal prosecution. The judge recommended further investigation by the state attorney general's office. As she stormed out, a news crew caught her. Her face twisted in rage. She shoved the microphone aside, yelling that we were all ungrateful and she did this for the good of the community. No one believed her. In the weeks that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The board was restructured. Elections were held fairly this time. I didn't run, but I supported Tim, who won by a landslide. He immediately canceled bogus fines, restored park access, and even hired a real landscaping team. No sketchy contracts this time. Karen's house went up for sale within the month. Rumor had it she was moving to Florida to start fresh. She left behind a legacy of pettiness, greed, and control, but more importantly, she left behind a community stronger and more united than it had ever been. And as for her car, let's just say she finally stopped blocking driveways. That lesson stuck with her, even when she tried to forget everything else, but we didn't forget. We remembered the lies, the threats, the damage, and how we beat it one driveway at a time.